That's part of us feeling empowered in ourselves as highly sensitive people. I always tell the people I work with, we're going to go into the world and the majority of people are not highly sensitive. There is going to be something that happens that's overwhelming in your day. So it's about how can you set yourself up to feel safe and grounded within yourself when things are chaotic or overwhelming or overstimulating. It's like, how can you come back to yourself and create that sense of safety? And I think that's some of our biggest growth, learning how to speak up for what we need and not be apologetic about it.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. Are you someone who is sensitive? Do bright lights and loud noise and pungent smells and scratchy fabrics, do they bother you? Are you even dialed into this? If you've been following me for a while, you know that I am an empath and an HSP, which is a highly sensitive person. And that I've been talking quite a lot about this publicly. And I saw this account online by a woman named Alissa Boyer, and she's a mentor for highly sensitive people. And her whole trip in life is to really help fellow HSPs learn how to unapologetically embrace their sensitivity and basically use it as a strength in their lives. So this interview that I did with Alissa was really illuminating about how she realized that she was an HSP. And if you're a highly sensitive person yourself, we have lots of ideas and ways that you can sort of take what might feel like a burden and turn it into your superpower. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. Wow, I'm so excited to welcome Alissa Boyer to the show. Welcome, Alissa.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's so exciting, as I was saying in your intro, how, I don't know, I've always been a highly sensitive person, but it's almost like writing this book on high functioning codependency. I'm seeing all of this connection between. So I know that when I saw your Instagram stuff, I think we were just talking about how we met,
Yeah.
where I reposted something because I was like, wow, that is so dead on. So before we talk about what is a HSP, I'd love to know your backstory, your personal backstory. Why is this what you teach and what you coach people about? Highly sensitive people. That's what HSP stands for. So
Mhm.
tell me your story, would you?
For sure. Yeah. So, of course, I'm a highly sensitive person myself. Always knew I was a very sensitive person ever since I was a kid. But I didn't learn about the term highly sensitive person until about, I would say, about 7 years ago now at this point. So, just like a kind of quick rundown of how I came to learn about it and do this work. I was fresh out of college. I was working in this fast paced corporate environment. I was trying to climb the corporate ladder, and the people around me were working these long, crazy hours. And I've always been like a very driven, overachiever type of person. So I was pushing myself to do everything they were doing, but I was getting really sick. I started having severe digestive issues. I was completely
Mm,
burnt out. And I started seeing all these gastroenterologists. No one could help me. Eventually found my way to a holistic practitioner, and he was the first person who was like, "Hey, you're constantly anxious, you're constantly stressed out, this is impacting your gut health." So
mm,
in working with him, I started getting interested in like, what's this connection? Started reading self-help books. I started getting into meditation. And it was around this time that my mom actually discovered the book The Highly Sensitive Person, written by Dr. Elaine Aron. And she was like,
yep.
"Hey, I think this describes you." And I remember like reading that book and just feeling seen for the first time in my life. I was like, oh my gosh. I just had always thought being sensitive was like a bad thing. I tried to hide it. So from there, I started talking about it. I started a blog just for fun to share my insights that I was learning. And I mean, it very much organically grew to now being a mentor to highly sensitive people. I'm just so passionate about this work because so many people are still just discovering that they're highly sensitive. And it's like when you know that about yourself, it can completely open up your world. It's been a crazy journey for me.
Amazing. So, in your estimation, if someone is listening to this and they're like, a what? What is an HSP? What is a highly sensitive person? Tell me your definition or what you would tell them.
Yeah, so being a highly sensitive person is a trait. It's not something that you have to be diagnosed with. I think that's what people often think. Oh, I have to like be diagnosed? No, not at all. I compared to like, if you're an introvert or an extrovert, you might be more highly sensitive. It's the way that we are
Mhm.
wired. And it's not just about emotional sensitivity. That's one thing I always hear from people. Oh, you just cry a lot. Like, yeah, I do cry more easily usually, but that's not the only thing. So being highly sensitive, we're sensitive to our environments. We're going to be more impacted by the lights in the room, the itchy fabric, the tag in our shirt that's annoying. We're going to notice the scents in the room. We are very empathetic. We tend to pick up on other people's emotions and have that sense like, oh, this is somebody I can trust. We are often that person that our friends go to for advice. Like, we're just the feelers. We are just so open and aware of the world around us. And this is not like scientific definition, but to me, I always feel like we're kind of missing a filter between ourselves and the rest of the world. We just take it in. And so sometimes we do get more overstimulated than other
Mhm.
people. And that's another a way that you'll kind of know you're highly sensitive. Like, packed schedule might make you feel super frazzled. So I always just kind of share like the personal things that people could see themselves in, where they're like, oh yeah, that sounds like me.
Right. So in the work that you do, why do you think that so many highly sensitive people feel ashamed of their sensitivity? Because I see this as a psychotherapist as well.
Hmm.
What's your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like in our society, in our world, I don't see sensitivity as something that's typically celebrated. A lot of times we hear this narrative like, toughen up, have a thick skin, like, you don't want to care too much, you don't want to be too emotional. So we're brought up in this world that really celebrates just being not caring so much. I mean, I'm starting to see a shift, thankfully, but I think it's just
Mhm.
ingrained in us. And then, our parents are kind of raising us with like, oh, don't be so dramatic. Oh, just let it go. Like, it's not that big of a deal. And so I think we really internalize these messages. And so we feel like, oh, the way that I am, my big emotions, the way that I'm so sensitive to my sleep and all the things, like, this is bad and wrong. And so it can kind of make us feel like inherently there's something wrong with us, and that's
Mm.
something to be ashamed of. And a lot of times we just feel alone because, again, it's kind of like I still don't feel like a lot of people know about it, and so we're like, oh, I'm the only one who feels this way. So it's just like that shame, like that dark feeling that's like hidden inside of us, feeling wrong for who we are.
Yeah. So hopefully, all of you listening to this or watching this on YouTube who identify as a highly sensitive person, A, I mean, I talk about it all the time. You're so not alone, and you're not too sensitive. As long as you're not blaming other people
Mhm.
for the way that you feel. Even then, you're not too sensitive. You just have disordered boundaries. So I want to say that with a caveat because a lot of times people, especially if you're an HSP, you have heard in your lifetime, you're too sensitive. And I really think that sensitivity, as you say, is your superpower, can be your superpower.
Mhm.
So, how do you think, or how do you coach people when they're wanting to use the sensitivity sort of as strength in their
Yeah.
life? What steps what can they do?
For sure. I always like, I think a great place to always start is just like learning about the trait, reading the book, The Highly Sensitive Person by Dr. Elaine Aron, listening to some podcasts out there. Like, I have my podcast, you have your episode about being a highly sensitive person. Like, just start to learn about the facts about the trait, because to me, I think it just like opens up a new world and really validates the way that you've always felt. And there's like research that backs it. It's like, oh, this feels like so good to just know that this is a real thing. So that's like the first step. I also just I think it's great to be in community with other HSPs, because it's like, if we feel ashamed of our nature, I think that shame can only live in the dark. So it's like, if we start to be around other people who have always heard they were too sensitive, and you start having real conversations with others like you, it's like, it's just so validating, and you can really start to heal within community. And that was one reason I started doing my work, was I wanted to bring HSPs together so we could finally be like, oh, hey, like, I'm not alone. So that's a huge part of it. Another thing is like, just start learning how to take good care of yourselves. That's a key in order for us to use our sensitivity as a superpower. It's like, we have to have good boundaries. We can't just like be giving to everyone all of the time and like neglecting our needs, because we're not going
Yeah.
to be able to tap into our strength if we are burnt out. And my story I shared of having chronic digestive issues, like, I know so many HSPs who've had chronic health issues of some sort because they didn't know, like me, how to care for themselves properly. Those are some things I would say. It's just like learning how to take care of yourself and being around others like you. It helps so much.
So, personally, how do you take care of your energy? Do you do any energy work? Do you do any stuff like that? Or how do you do it?
Yeah, I actually do. So I see like a Reiki practitioner like once a month. I make it a priority for me to be
Mhm.
poured back into by others. I see a therapist. It's very important for me to receive support because for a long time it was not something I prioritized. So those are some things that I do. I try to meditate every day. I'm a new mom. I have a 6-month-old daughter, so my life looks so different than it used to. But I
Right.
have practices, things in my life where I can kind of ground back into myself. And I've gotten to a point now over the years where I can sense when I've kind of like let someone else's mood or energy impact me. And so I know, like, okay, if I'm kind of feeling wonky after I had an interaction, like, okay, like I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to like feel my feet on the ground. I'm going to listen to a meditation or drink a glass of water mindfully just to kind of get back to myself. So it's important, I found, to have practices and to allow myself to be supported. I think all HSPs need to know how to do that.
I think that's great advice. And I like the image of having others sort of pour back into your own bucket because, as highly sensitive folks, it can be really easy to do exactly what you did and what I did in my young life, where you just give until you drop. You
Hmm.
just burn yourself out. I remember my therapist saying to me once about never giving up. And she was like, "So, what would it take?" I mean, never giving up, even on things I should probably have given up on. And
Hmm.
she was like, "What would it take?" She's like, "Terry, you're like the ultimate bailer of the boat. You just keep going. What would it take for you to stop?" And I was like, "I think I'd have to be dead. I don't know." Like I literally couldn't even imagine having limits, boundaries, better self-care because I felt so overly responsible for all the people and all the things. Do you see this in your coaching work that highly sensitive people are also feel hyper responsible?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, that's why your work had resonated so deeply with me when you talked about overfunctioning and all of this. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly it." And I feel like almost every HSP I talk to does this in some sense. And I think a lot of times we just attach like ourselves to how much we give and how much we do. It's like, "Oh, that's just who I am. That's just what I do. I'm the giver. I'm always there. I'm always on top of things." And I mean, not to generalize, but as HSPs, a lot of times we tend to be very conscientious and thoughtful. And so it's very natural for us, I think, to like kind of take on that role, not to mention, conditioning and all of that. But the interesting thing too, when I work with HSPs and I'm like, hey, I think it's time to set some boundaries, or I know it's time to set some boundaries, a lot of people will say, like, oh, I just feel so guilty, or I feel like such a bad person. And it's like, we're so used to always like us doing for others makes us a good person that
Hmm.
it can be hard to imagine, oh, if I make time for myself, like we just think that that makes us a bad person because we've been so attached to always doing. So it's very pervasive. It's crazy.
It is pervasive. And I think that the whole thing about why meditation is such a great idea and daily practice, as you're saying, and I have one as well, is that it just slows it down a little bit. There's a
Yes.
pause kind of where you go, okay. I mean, my own, I talk about this in other episodes, my own having a dedicated practice, I gained about, I don't know, 2 to 3 seconds of response time. So if you're an HSP who tends towards the insta yes, to help others, to abandon yourself, to give things up because somebody else wants it or whatever, imagine how different things might be if you gained just 2 to 3 seconds of response time. Because for me, it really changed my life. Like, I could not believe how different I actually reacted to things. Like, I would have the initial reaction, maybe that would be anger and heat. But before meditation, I would hit send on that angry email, right?
Yeah.
And then be like apologizing and be like, wow, I totally overreacted. Like, that sucks. Not going to deal with that. As opposed to maybe write the angry email and go, do I really want to send that? No, I don't. Okay. Delete or
Right.
put it in drafts or whatever. as a highly sensitive person, we feel the other person's either their expectation or we know what they want
Yeah.
from us. HSPs can be natural people pleasers.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And that's one of the biggest things I see come up is that people pleasing, that tendency. And like one of the things I realized with my own journey with people pleasing is a lot of times I was just doing it because I didn't want to feel uncomfortable if somebody didn't like what I said or did. Like I was always trying to like kind of tiptoe and make sure everyone else was happy because honestly, it made me feel more comfortable because, oh my gosh, if someone is unhappy with me, then I'm going to have this awkward conversation or I'm going to get flustered and I'm not going to know what to say. And so a lot of times I was people pleasing because I knew what they wanted and I knew what would keep the peace. And that's like kind of an interesting thing that I've seen in others as well. But yeah, and just what you were saying about like the pause too. I just have to say, like, I had a moment this morning, even with my husband, where he said something that I was like, seriously? Like, I just wanted to react so quickly, but just having that moment to like pause and be like, okay, how do I want to react here? Like, it's everything. It helps you avoid a lot of issues. It helps you avoid doing things that you actually don't want to do, saying yes to
Mhm.
activities and events and all of the things. So, yeah, all of that is so important for us as highly sensitive people.
Yeah, there's something about what you said about sort of wanting to be what the person wants you to be, wanting to give
Mm.
them that. And of course, this also is having disordered boundaries because it's like becoming a chameleon because of our high sensitivity or our highly empathicness. We can sense like one thing about, at least for me as an HSP, I can see if a micro expression has changed on
Mhm.
someone's face. Like I can feel their energy. I know things about people that I do not want to know. Like, I mean, I feel like I'm a cognitive intuit, like someone had told me that once where I was like, how do I know all of this stuff about people that they didn't even friggin' tell me, but I
Mhm.
literally know it like I know it. And I used to think, wow, I'm just good like that. And then when I started really looking into that, I was like, oh, wow, it's like getting a download almost about someone. Have you had that, Elise? Have you had anything like that?
Oh my gosh, yes, all the time. And it took me a while to get to a point where I could actually trust those feelings that I had and like trust those intuitions and those like things the subtleties that we pick up as sensitive people. Because, I think it just goes along with like how we are in society where it's like, oh, you're too sensitive, you're too dramatic, you're too much. So naturally, a lot of us are kind of like, oh, I can't trust this feeling like, oh, I'm probably just being dramatic. Oh, it's probably just my anxiety. And it's like a lot of times we're just like kind of brushing that off. But I think when you start to kind of like play around with like, no, I think I'm onto something here. And you start to just like listen to those little nudges or kind of pay attention to those subtleties and actually kind of like go with it and start trusting your gut and trusting it. It's like amazing the world that it opens up. I think that's such a perfect example of how sensitivity can be a strength because it certainly helped me in business. It's helped me to be a better coach and mentor because I can sense what people need. And of course, you just have to do it in a way that's healthy and not have that empath sponge where it's like, oh my gosh, they don't feel good. I have to be codependent and try to fix everything so I feel
Yep.
okay. You have to have the discernment, which is tough, but yeah, it's such a gift. It's super cool that we have that ability.
It is a gift. And I think that this is what I want anyone listening to feel hope that if you didn't know what a highly sensitive person was, I hope you do now. If it's like for years and years, even as a little kid, it's like I remember never wanting lights on in my bedroom. Now, most kids are afraid of the dark, right? But I always loved just the light from outside. It's like I liked candles, I liked little twinkly lights, even as a kid. And I
Mhm.
remember when I started therapy when I was 19, I remember thinking, this is so weird. What is the deal with me and lights? Why do I want to live in the dark? And I feel like I can see in the dark. Now I know that
Wow.
sounds crazy. Like even with my eyes closed, and maybe I have a photographic, I don't know. But whatever room I'm in, if my eyes are closed, it's as if they're open if it's dark. Weird. Okay. Do
That's
you have
cool.
anything like that? I'm just curious, or is that just me?
I no, I don't actually. I think that's cool. I think there's something there though.
Me too. I don't know what. But for those listening, you guys, it's like how you feel matters. And I hope that you follow Alissa, Instagram, all this stuff will be in the show notes where you can find her, where you can find her work. But it's like it matters how
Yeah.
you feel and what you
Yes.
think. And I think that's one thing, being a highly sensitive person, is that if we're waiting around for others to prioritize our comfort and they're not an HSP, even if they try, they're going to fail
Mm.
because what we need to be comfortable is going to be different than what someone else needs. And another really important thing that I think, and I know that you have this in your work as well, is that you don't need to write a dissertation about why you need what you need.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, you're like speaking to my soul when you say all of that too. That's just like such an important thing and that's part of us feeling empowered in ourselves as highly sensitive people is like I always tell the people I work with, like, you can't, we're going to go into the world and the majority of people are not highly sensitive. There is going to be something that happens that's overwhelming. Like, that's a promise in your day. So it's about how can you set yourself up to feel safe and grounded within yourself when things are chaotic or overwhelming or overstimulating. It's like, how can you come back to yourself and create that sense of safety? And I think that's some of our biggest growth in general is like learning how to speak up for what we need and not be apologetic about it and not be like, oh my gosh, I know this is like too much, but rather just like speaking up with confidence, like, hey, no, I can't go tonight because I'm exhausted. I'll see you tomorrow, whatever. Like just
Yep.
starting to speak up with confidence is there's so much healing in that, especially because so many of us, felt apologetic about our needs and felt like they were too much. So it's like, nope, I'm here. And this matters.
Yes, how I feel matters. And I love that. I mean, I think there's something about knowing your preferences. Like, even think about something as simple as if you have the luxury of going for a massage. It's like
Hmm.
being clear, concise, honest about
Yes.
what's happening, if it's working or not for you. When I go somewhere, my my massage therapist, who I've been going to for a long time, she knows as soon as I come in, she's like, "You want the music and the lights really low, right?" I was like, "Yes, I do." Today and every single day that I ever come here, I want the music and the lights really low. And she just does it kind of naturally, or she'll
Yes.
ask, but usually she just adjusts it to my preference. Not asking me questions about my preference, but she wouldn't know it if I didn't
Yes.
say it. And it's the same as a highly sensitive person or even an empath. It's like we have to share what is happening for us?
Oh my gosh, so much. Yes. I think of the night before my wedding, we were staying in a hotel with my girlfriends, and like there was this situation where they're like, oh, I think that like we need you to share a bed with one of the other girls because otherwise we're going to have to get another room. And there's this whole thing where I felt so guilty. I was like, I don't like sleeping next to people. This is my wedding night. I want to be alone. And I grappled with this in my mind. And then I finally was like, hey, I'm not trying to be difficult, but I really prefer to sleep in my own bed on my wedding night. And I asserted that and I shared that and my friends were more than happy to oblige. And in the past, I wouldn't have said a thing and I would have woken up tired for the biggest day of my life. But
Yep.
instead, because it's like, no, I need sleep and this is what I need. And I don't need to apologize for that. So that one always just sticks out because you also build so much confidence when you have those micro moments of being like, this is what I need. And that's okay.
And what does it show you? It's you creating an opening for your friends to step up and love you the way you need to be loved.
Yeah. Yeah. People aren't going to know unless we tell them, even though it's
Exactly.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, and in the beginning, and those of you guys listening or watching this, if you haven't been sort of speaking up about the way you feel about lights or scratchy sheets or scratchy anything or too much sound or feeling sort of bad to say no, to do things that can be it with the kind of stimuli that's there, it can be overwhelming to you. I hope that this episode with Alissa Boyer has inspired you to want to step into your power as an HSP because it really is. I mean, I would definitely not be doing what I'm doing for a living. There's no way you'd be doing what you're doing,
No.
obviously. But you know what I mean? Like, this is the path. And it can
Yes.
either be, I really believe it's either a blessing or a curse. And it's a blessing if you know how to take care of yourself, protect yourself, speak up for yourself, stand up for yourself, right?
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. It's all in how you view it. And it can be a journey. A lot of us have to go on some windy journey to get to this place where it's like, okay, I embrace this, I accept this, and I love this about myself. But it opens such a world for us. And I just think that we weren't created this way for no reason. I think there is a divine purpose because I know so many HSPs now who are starting to share their message and do incredible work. And it's like you're using your intuitive, empathetic gifts to help others. Like, I just think that it might sound lofty, but I really think that we were created this way to help others too. It's a beautiful trait.
I totally agree. I wouldn't want to be any different, but I'm happy I know what I know now so that I can
Amen.
protect my energy and zip up my energy. I want to ask you one last question that I
Mhm.
ask a lot of people on the show, which is, when it comes to boundaries in your life, what has been your most, let's say, difficult boundary challenge or boundary struggle? And how did you overcome it if you have?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think my biggest boundary struggle has honestly come from doing this work because I am such an empath. I am that person who wants to help everyone. And so as like my platform has grown, I've had so many people come to me and like have these very deep questions or things that they're personally dealing with. And for the longest time, I would just give and give and give because I'm like, I love this. I want to help you. And I
Right.
found myself depleted and I found myself resentful sometimes as well. Like,
Hmm.
oh, does my energy not matter? And so it's been very hard because I know this is like my life's calling to help people with this, but I've learned that I can help support people so much better when I'm not freely giving to everyone all of the time and I'm taking my needs into account because I can also be a better leader to share by example like, hey, no, like I have boundaries and people can see, oh, maybe that's like an okay thing. It doesn't make me a bad person. So, yeah, that's what comes to mind right away for me.
I love it. All right. So
Mhm.
tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, so I am on Instagram, Life by Alyssa, and my website is sensitiveandsoulful.com. So you can find all of the things there. I have a podcast as well, all for HSP's Sensitive and Soulful Show.
I love it. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I appreciate what you're doing in the world. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So fun.